All right, so Donald Trump's criminal trial is on a break today to allow the former president to attend his son Barron's high school graduation. When court resumes on Monday, Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, will return to the stand for a fourth day. Yesterday, he faced hours of intense questioning, with defense attorneys accusing him of lying during his testimony. So joining me now in Studio 57 is CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman. Katrina, always good to see you again. Bring us up to speed. What did we hear from Cohen the last time he was on the stand? What stood out?
So they really spent a lot of time attacking Cohen's credibility yesterday, which is, of course, something that we expected and that the prosecution has been preparing the jury for. But they heard this litany of all of the times he's lied to Congress, that he's lied under oath. They brought out inconsistencies about things he said about whether or not he wanted a position at the White House or sought a presidential pardon. And then the real standout moment of the day is they brought out a phone call that Cohen had testified about earlier in the week, where he said he called Trump's former bodyguard, Keith Schiller.
A judge has ruled that Barron Trump, a teenager who has been deliberately shielded from politics, must testify against his father or face contempt and possible jail time. The unprecedented move drags the president's youngest child into the center of a legal storm, shattering his carefully protected private life. The reaction inside the White House has been nothing short of apocalyptic. This isn't just another legal headache for an administration that has grown accustomed to constant legal challenges. This is something fundamentally different. This is personal. This is family. This cuts straight to the core of what it means to be a parent watching your child become collateral damage in a political war. Sources close to the administration describe a scene of utter chaos, with advisors scrambling, lawyers frantically filing motions, and the president himself reportedly in a state of barely contained fury. The political implications of this decision are staggering. We're not talking about a minor procedural move that will be forgotten by next week. We're talking about a precedent-setting moment that could reshape how political prosecutions are conducted for generations to come. If it's acceptable to threaten a president's minor child with jail time to extract testimony, then what's next?
Because at the time Trump was with him, that was a way to talk to him and update him on the Stormy Daniels situation. And we saw this call log. It was a 1 and 30-second call. But what they showed us in court yesterday is that surrounding it were text messages between Cohen and the bodyguard about a teenager that had been harassing Cohen, a 14-year-old, apparently. Right. And so what Todd Blanche, Trump's attorney, said is that Cohen was lying about it. He really made
Cohen had said that phone call was about
Stormy Daniels. So he was saying, how could you possibly have talked about both of these things in this 1 and 30 seconds? And, inferred that because they were texting about the harassment, it must have been what the phone call was about. Right. So really, he's trying to insinuate that not only has Cohen lied on the stand in the past, but perhaps he's not being honest in this courtroom now.
And they continue to sort of question his motivation, right? Pointing out ways in which he has been sort of calling for revenge. They talk about his podcast where he said that he wanted Trump to go down for what he did with his family. I don't know if that's really sort of a counterpoint to what Cohen is saying that Trump did, but I guess motivation counts for something.
It does. As you're saying, though, it doesn't go to the facts of the case. But when they played that podcast, I was in the courtroom and it was...
What limits remain? What lines are still uncrossed? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're the kind of questions that constitutional scholars and legal ethicists are grappling with right now, and the answers they're reaching are deeply troubling. Let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here. Barron Trump is not being accused of any crime. He's not being investigated for any wrongdoing. He's not even being accused of having direct knowledge of anything illegal. He's being compelled to testify because prosecutors believe he might have seen or heard something that could be used against his father. That's the entire basis for this legal assault on a teenager. The mere possibility that he might possess information that could damage the president's defense. This is the kind of legal reasoning that makes people lose faith in the justice system entirely. The timing of this move is particularly suspect. With multiple legal battles swirling around the president and his team, with the political climate already toxic and polarized, suddenly Barron is being thrust into the spotlight.
Very jarring. For one, it was quite loud, but also the Michael Cohen that we've seen on the stand has been so calm. He's been measured. He's really kept his cool, been very composed. And then on the podcast, you heard this sort of bombastic, vengeful Michael Cohen. So I wondered if the jury also is thinking about whether the Michael Cohen they're seeing on the stand is the Michael Cohen from real life. So yet again, it could also hit at his credibility potentially. But yes, it shows that he could be motivated by vengeance, but does that necessarily actually undermine the facts of this case?
Right.
Not necessarily.
Can we talk about the political circus surrounding this case, which I think has just grown day by day? I mean, it used to be just, Trump stopping to talk to cameras every day, but now there's whole groups of Republicans showing up.
Yeah, it's become quite a circus. And yesterday was really striking. Trump strode in, and filing behind him was just the biggest entourage that I had seen yet. There were almost a dozen House Republicans in court with him, along with his son, Eric Trump. And then the other day, there were a few people who had come. It's almost become a vice presidential audition as well. J.D. Vance was there. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, came the other day.
It's almost as if prosecutors are looking for any pressure point they can find, any vulnerability they can exploit, any way to make the president's life more difficult and his legal position more precarious. And what better pressure point than a beloved child? What better way to force compliance than to threaten something the president holds most dear? Trump's legal team has responded with predictable ferocity, calling the decision outrageous and politically motivated. They argue that Barron is being used as a pawn, a bargaining chip in a larger game that has nothing to do with justice and everything to do with destroying the president's political career. And while it's easy to dismiss such claims as the reflexive defense of a legal team under siege, it's harder to ignore the fundamental logic of their argument. Why would prosecutors choose this path if not to create maximum leverage? Why go after the teenager when there are other avenues to explore? The public reaction has been equally explosive.
And Adam, I want to begin with the judge's discussion of contempt. Begin where the judge began this morning. He hands out his opinion, and then he speaks extemporaneously from the bench, addressing himself directly to Donald Trump. Did it seem to register on the defendant?
Absolutely, Lawrence. And it's the fact that it registers is memorialized in the conferences that Trump does every day. The reporters tried to, I don't think this is too strong a word, bait him again and again to violate the gag order, asking, and I'm reading some of the questions here, is Stormy Daniels a liar? Is Michael Cohen a liar? Could you do a night at Rikers? Why did you pay Michael Cohen? They asked about the jury. Each time, nothing from Trump. And it's clear to see why Trump is abstaining, because this is the first time that Judge Merchan has vocalized that threat of jail to Trump. And if he put it out loud in open court, and if the prosecutors brought another alleged violation to his bench and he heard it, he found another violation,
cutting across traditional political lines in ways that reveal just how unsettling this situation is to people of all political persuasions. Conservative commentators are predictably outraged, seeing this as yet another example of the weaponization of the justice system against the president. But liberal commentators aren't universally celebrating the move either. Many are expressing discomfort, acknowledging that while they may want to see the president held accountable, the method being employed here feels excessive and potentially counterproductive. Social media has been on fire with reactions ranging from disbelief to anger to genuine fear about where this could lead. People are asking questions that have no easy answers. How did we get to this point? What happened to the unwritten rules that used to govern political warfare?
He threw down the gauntlet. If he doesn't throw Trump in jail, he would look entirely like a paper tiger. And Trump got that message. And it was evident in the press conferences during the proceedings and after the proceedings of the day.
So, Andrew, when we hear jail, we're all thinking Rikers Island and sending a former president to Rikers Island with his Secret Service detail. We could hear in what the judge said from the bench that he is concerned with the things I've wondered about, which is how does the Secret Service do this? How do the local officials handle it? How do they interact? How does it work? In real practical terms, what are the options that the judge has that could involve some measure of incarceration without necessarily it being Rikers Island?
So leaving aside that he could just say, as Neil has suggested and Ryan Goodman have suggested, that he says, you know what, I can consider this later. I can decide what sentence to impose later. If there's conviction, I can decide.
When did it become acceptable to threaten children in pursuit of political advantage? The fact that these questions are being asked at all is a sign of how far the boundaries have shifted, how much the Overton window of acceptable political conduct has moved in recent years. The legal basis for this move is technically sound, which is what makes it so troubling. Courts do have broad authority to compel testimony from anyone who might possess relevant information. The law doesn't explicitly exempt the children of presidents from this authority. But legality and appropriateness are two very different things, and it's the gap between them that's causing so much consternation. Just because something can be done doesn't mean it should be done. And this is a classic example of a legal power being exercised in a way that feels more like abuse than legitimate process. This isn't the first time the Trump family has faced legal scrutiny, but it's the first time it has reached this level of personal intrusion. The impeachment proceedings were one thing. They targeted the president himself and his official conduct. The various investigations into the Trump organization were another thing. They focused on business practices and financial dealings. But this is something else entirely. This is targeting a family member who has never been involved in politics, who has never sought the public eye, who has done nothing except exist as the child of a controversial public figure. The psychological impact on Barron is impossible to overstate. He's at an age where adolescents are already navigating immense personal changes and challenges. Add to that the pressure of being the president's son, the constant media attention, the relentless scrutiny of every aspect of his life, then add the threat of being forced to testify against his own father under penalty of jail time. It's hard to imagine a more psychologically damaging situation for a young person to be in. This isn't just legal pressure. This is emotional torture. Melania Trump's reported response adds another layer of poignancy to this story. She has been famously protective of Barron, refusing to let him be drawn into the political circus that surrounds his father. She has fought to keep him out of the public eye, to give him as normal a childhood as possible, given the extraordinary circumstances of his family. And now, despite all her efforts, her son is being dragged into the very nightmare she tried to protect him from. The reports of her fury are entirely believable. What mother wouldn't be furious at this violation of her child's life? The family dynamics at play here are incredibly complex. On one side, you have a father who is fighting for his political life, who needs every advantage he can get, who is being attacked from every direction. On the other side, you have a mother who wants nothing more than to protect her son from harm, who sees the legal system as a threat to her child's well-being. And in the middle, you have a teenager who loves both his parents, who is being forced into an impossible choice, who is being asked to betray one to protect the other or face punishment himself. The rumors about Melania considering leaving Washington are telling, even if they remain unconfirmed. The idea that she might take Barron and leave the country, leave her husband, leave everything behind to protect her son from this legal assault speaks volumes about how desperate the situation has become. Whether those rumors have any basis in fact or are just speculative gossip, their existence reflects the intensity of the pressure this family is under. People don't even whisper about such dramatic measures unless the situation is genuinely dire. Trump's legal defense strategy has already been under enormous strain, with multiple cases advancing simultaneously, witnesses coming forward, documents being revealed, and the legal landscape shifting constantly. The threat to Barron represents yet another front in this multi-front war, another pressure point that the defense must address. But unlike legal arguments about executive privilege or questions about financial records, this is personal, this is emotional. This cuts to the very core of Trump's identity as a father and family man. Prosecutors clearly believe that Barron's testimony could be significant, that he might have observed or overheard something that would damage Trump's legal position. Perhaps he witnessed conversations between his father and advisors. Perhaps he saw documents that were left lying around the White House or Mar-a-Lago. Perhaps he heard phone calls that revealed something prosecutors need to know. The specific nature of what they're seeking hasn't been disclosed, but the intensity of their pursuit suggests they believe the potential payoff is worth the enormous controversy they've generated. This situation represents a genuine test of the American legal system. Can the system balance the legitimate need for testimony against the ethical obligation to protect minors from being weaponized? Can courts exercise their authority to compel testimony while also respecting the boundaries that should exist around family life? These are difficult questions with no easy answers, and the way this case is resolved will establish precedents that could affect future political prosecutions for decades to come. What's particularly striking about this situation is how thoroughly it validates Trump's narrative that he's being targeted by a politically motivated justice system. Whether that narrative is accurate or not, the threat against Barron makes it look accurate. It gives Trump a powerful talking point that resonates even with people who don't generally support him. When you threaten someone's child, you create sympathy for that person, regardless of what you think about their politics. That's just human nature, and prosecutors should have known this would be the reaction. The decision to target Barron Trump represents a significant escalation in the legal warfare surrounding the president. This isn't just another subpoena or another demand for documents. This is going after family in the most direct way possible, using the power of the courts to threaten someone who has never sought public office, who has never been involved in politics, who has done nothing except be born into a controversial family. The message being sent is unmistakable. No one is off limits. Everyone is fair game. There are no boundaries that won't be crossed. What makes this particularly troubling is the pattern it establishes for future political prosecutions. If it's acceptable to threaten a president's minor child with jail time to compel testimony, then what prevents similar tactics from being used against the children of other political figures? What prevents prosecutors from going after the children of members of Congress, the children of governors, the children of anyone who finds themselves in the crosshairs of a politically motivated investigation? Once this door is opened, it's very difficult to close it again. The legal arguments surrounding this case are complex and contested. On one side, prosecutors argue that no one is above the law, that everyone with relevant information has an obligation to provide it, and that special treatment for the president's family would be a dangerous precedent. On the other side, Trump's lawyers argue that compelling a minor child to testify against his parent is fundamentally inappropriate, that it violates basic principles of family privacy, and that it crosses an ethical line regardless of what the law technically allows. There's also the practical question of what Barron's testimony could actually accomplish. Even if he does testify, even if he provides information that prosecutors find useful, what then? How much weight would the testimony of a teenager who was a child at the time of the events in question actually carry? How reliable would his recollections be? How much damage could his testimony really do to Trump's defense? These are questions that prosecutors must be asking themselves, and their willingness to push forward suggests they believe the answers justify the enormous controversy they've created. The political calculations here are fascinating. On the surface, this move seems like a massive gift to Trump's political narrative. It gives him exactly the kind of ammunition he needs to argue that he's being persecuted, that his enemies will stop at nothing, that his family is being destroyed by the political system. But perhaps prosecutors believe that the political damage to Trump of having his son testify, the public humiliation, the family drama, the way it would dominate headlines and consume the news cycle, outweighs any sympathy he might gain from the situation. The media coverage of this story has been intense and revealing. Some outlets are presenting this as a straightforward legal matter, focusing on the technical arguments about subpoena power and contempt of court. Others are leaning into the human drama, emphasizing the unprecedented nature of threatening a president's child. The contrast in coverage reflects the broader polarization of the media environment, with different outlets framing the same events in dramatically different ways depending on their editorial orientation and target audience. What's largely missing from the coverage, however, is any real consideration of Barron as a person. He's being treated as a legal object, a potential source of testimony, a chess piece in a larger game. His humanity, his youth, his vulnerability, these elements are often mentioned in passing but rarely examined in depth. Yet they're the most important aspects of this entire situation. Before he's the president's son, before he's a potential witness, before he's any of the things that make him legally relevant, he's a young person who deserves to be treated with dignity and compassion. The impact on Barron's education and social life must also be considered. He's at an age when school and friendships are critically important. Being dragged into a national legal drama is the opposite of a normal adolescent experience. Even if he testifies and the case is resolved quickly, the trauma of the experience could linger for years. This is the kind of thing that could affect his mental health, his relationships, his entire trajectory in life. That's not an exaggeration. It's the reality of what happens when teenagers are subjected to extreme stress. There's a broader cultural context here that deserves attention. We live in an era of unprecedented political polarization, where the normal rules of political engagement seem to have been suspended. The kind of restraint that used to characterize political warfare, the understanding that some things were off limits, that families should be protected from the worst excesses of political combat, that sense has largely disappeared. Both sides have contributed to this erosion of norms, but the threat against Barron represents a particularly stark example of how far things have gone. Trump has always been a polarizing figure, and his opponents have always been eager to find ways to damage him politically and legally. But there have traditionally been limits to what they were willing to do, lines they wouldn't cross. The threat against Barron suggests that those limits are eroding, that the desire to defeat Trump has become so consuming that it's overriding basic ethical constraints. This is a dangerous development, regardless of one's feelings about Trump himself. The precedent matters more than the individual. The role of the judge in this situation is worth examining. Judges are supposed to be neutral arbiters, applying the law fairly and dispassionately. But issuing a public threat against a teenager, threatening him with jail time in a way that generated headlines and controversy, raises questions about whether that judicial neutrality has been compromised. Even if the judge's decision was legally correct, the way it was communicated seemed designed to maximize pressure and create maximum drama. That's not what impartial justice is supposed to look like. Trump's legal team is likely exploring every possible avenue to prevent Barron from having to testify. They're filing motions, seeking delays, arguing that the testimony is unnecessary and that the threat of jail time is disproportionate. They're also likely considering appeals if the lower courts rule against them. This is going to be a protracted legal battle with both sides digging in and fighting hard. The outcome is far from certain, and there are many twists and turns yet to come. The potential for this case to reach the Supreme Court is significant. The constitutional and ethical questions involved are precisely the kind of issues that the Supreme Court was designed to address. If the case does reach the highest court, the decision could have far-reaching implications for how political prosecutions are conducted in the future. The justices would be forced to weigh the legitimate needs of prosecutors against the fundamental rights of family members to be protected from harassment and intimidation. What makes this situation particularly fraught is the overlap between the personal and the political. For Trump, this isn't just another legal battle. This is his son. This is his family. This is the most personal possible attack. The emotional stakes are enormous, and that emotional intensity is likely to influence how Trump and his team respond. They're not going to be rational and measured about this. They're going to be furious and aggressive, which is exactly what prosecutors might have anticipated and hoped for. The relationship between Trump and his legal team is also likely to be affected by this situation. Lawyers are supposed to provide calm, strategic guidance, but it's difficult to remain calm when your client's child is being threatened. There may be tensions between those who want to fight every battle and those who want to pursue more strategic approaches. The stress of the situation could lead to fractures in the legal team, making it harder to mount an effective defense across the multiple cases that Trump is facing. There's also the question of how this situation affects Trump's other children. Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka have all been involved in the family business and have faced their own legal scrutiny. But they're adults who chose to be involved in the Trump organization and in their father's political activities. Barron is different. He never chose any of this. He was born into it. The contrast between how his older siblings are treated and how he's being treated might actually make the situation worse, highlighting how unfair it is that he's being dragged into this. The question of what happens next is on everyone's mind, and there are several possible scenarios. The first is that Barron's legal team manages to block the testimony order, arguing successfully that it's inappropriate to compel a minor to testify against his parent. This would be a significant victory for Trump and would likely be used as evidence of the legal system's overreach. The second possibility is that the order stands and Barron is forced to testify, potentially providing information that damages Trump's legal position. This would be the outcome prosecutors are hoping for. The third possibility, and one that's been discussed by legal analysts, is that Barron's testimony ends up being far less damaging than prosecutors hope. Perhaps he doesn't remember what they think he remembers. Perhaps what he observed wasn't significant. Perhaps the defense is able to undermine his credibility or the relevance of his testimony. In this scenario, prosecutors would have gone through all this controversy for very little gain, making themselves look vindictive and ineffective in the process. The political fallout from this situation is likely to be significant regardless of how it resolves. If Barron does testify, if he's forced to publicly discuss private family matters, the spectacle will dominate headlines for weeks. The drama of a teenager testifying against his father in a politically charged case is exactly the kind of story that the media loves. It will be analyzed, dissected, and debated endlessly. Trump's presidency will be consumed by it, unable to focus on anything else. If Barron's testimony is damaging, it could accelerate the collapse of Trump's legal position. Other witnesses who might have been reluctant to testify could be emboldened. Other evidence that might have been withheld could be disclosed. The dominoes could start falling in ways that make Trump's legal situation even worse. This is clearly what prosecutors are hoping for, and it's why they're willing to accept the backlash against their tactics. But if the testimony is not damaging, or if it's blocked entirely, the situation could backfire on prosecutors. They will have created a massive political controversy for nothing. They will have given Trump a powerful narrative about political persecution with no corresponding benefit to their case. The political momentum could shift in Trump's favor, making it harder to pursue other aspects of his prosecution. This is the gamble they're taking, and it's a significant one. There are also potential constitutional implications to consider. The separation of powers, the right to privacy, the protection of family integrity, these are all principles that could be implicated in this case. The courts will need to balance these principles against the legitimate needs of prosecutors. The decisions they make will establish precedents that could affect future cases in unpredictable ways. This isn't just about Trump and Barron, it's about the framework of American constitutional law. The personal toll on Melania Trump deserves particular attention. She has been unusually private for a first lady, but she's also been fiercely protective of her son. Watching him be dragged into this legal nightmare must be devastating for her. The reports that she's considering dramatic measures to protect him, including potentially leaving Washington, suggest that she sees this as an existential threat to her family's well-being. That's not an overreaction. That's the response of a mother who's watching her child be targeted. There are also reports that the stress is affecting Melania's relationship with her husband. While she has always stood by him publicly, the decision to target Barron could be a breaking point. If she feels that Trump's actions have brought this upon their family, if she sees the threats against her son as a consequence of his political ambitions, that could create real tension in their marriage. These are private matters that can't be known with certainty, but the rumors reflect the intensity of the pressure this family is under. The psychological impact on Barron will continue to be a concern. Being threatened with jail time, being forced into a position where he might have to testify against his father, being subjected to the public scrutiny and media circus that will surround his testimony, these are traumatic experiences for anyone, let alone a teenager. He'll need significant emotional support to navigate this situation, and it's unclear whether he'll receive it in the environment of the White House. There's a broader lesson here about the dangers of politicizing the legal system. When prosecutors pursue cases for political reasons, when they target political enemies with legal action, when they cross ethical boundaries in the pursuit of conviction, they undermine public faith in the justice system. People need to believe that the courts are fair and impartial. When they see tactics like the threat against Barron Trump, that faith is eroded. The damage to the institution of justice may last long after this particular case is resolved. The media's role in this situation is also worth examining. Sensational coverage of the Trump legal battles has driven ratings and clicks, but it's also contributed to an environment where everything is treated as a political crisis. The threat against Barron has been covered with maximum drama, feeding the sense that we're living through unprecedented times. While the drama is real, the constant amplification of it may be making the situation worse, intensifying emotions, and making rational deliberation more difficult. Ultimately, this situation is a test of the resilience of American institutions. Can the legal system navigate this challenge without losing its credibility? Can the political system absorb this shock without descending into further chaos? Can we as a society maintain our commitment to basic decency and fairness even when our political passions are inflamed? These are the questions that will be answered in the coming weeks and months as this story continues to unfold. The threat against Barron Trump is a stark reminder that politics has become intensely personal in ways that are damaging to our society. When we treat our political opponents as enemies to be destroyed rather than opponents to be debated, we lose something essential about what it means to be a democracy. The children of politicians shouldn't become casualties in our political wars. That's not a partisan position. That's a human position, and it's one that everyone, regardless of political affiliation, should be able to agree on. Barron Trump is being dragged into a legal storm he never asked for, facing potential jail time simply for being the president's son, a human consequence of broken politics. The outcome will test whether the system can balance prosecutorial needs with family rights and will be remembered as a turning point for American democracy.